The air over Quantico was thick with falling snow and the smell of wet pine. Each flake was a silent promise, blanketing the hard, disciplined lines of the base in a soft, forgiving white. The world had been reduced to shades of gray and the muffled crunch of boots on accumulating powder. Near the edge of the main parade ground, where the bronze statues of iron-jawed heroes stood sentinel, a figure moved with a patience that seemed older than the trees. He was an old man. His coat was a dark, worn wool, the kind that held the memory of 100 winters in its fibers. A simple watch cap was pulled low over his brow, shadowing eyes that had seen the color of skies over forgotten battlefields. His hands, though wrinkled and mapped with the blue rivers of his veins, were impossibly steady as he worked. He was building a snowman. He packed the base with a gentle, methodical pressure, his movements economical and serene. There was no shivering, no wasted motion. He was a fixed point in the swirling chaos of the storm, a monument of calm. This was Elias Thorne. To the world, he was just another octogenarian visitor, perhaps the grandfather of some young Marine, allowed on base for a family day that the weather had all but canceled. He looked frail, a dry leaf clinging to a branch in winter. But his stillness was not the stillness of fragility. It was the stillness of a mountain. The quiet hum of the base was suddenly broken by a different kind of energy. Laughter, sharp and loud, sliced through the heavy air. 4 figures emerged from the direction of the new barracks, their silhouettes crisp and imposing against the snow-dusted brick. They were Marines, young and vital, their chests puffed out with the unassailable confidence of men who had recently earned the title. Leading them was Lieutenant Chad McCarthy. McCarthy was 24 years old, carved from the very marble the Corps used for its recruiting posters. His jaw was square, his haircut was perfect, and his eyes held the cold, arrogant gleam of a man who believed he was destined for greatness and was impatient for the world to catch up. He saw the old man. He saw the snowman. A sneer tugged at the corner of his lips. "Well, well, boys," McCarthy's voice boomed, each word a puff of white vapor. "Look what we have here. Grandpa's daycare is still open." His 3 subordinates, all lance corporals fresh from the School of Infantry, chuckled on command. They were young enough to mistake cruelty for humor and arrogance for strength. From McCarthy's perspective, the scene was an insult. This was Quantico, the crossroads of the Marine Corps. This was hallowed ground where legends were forged in fire and steel, not a public park for doddering old men to play in the snow. The old man was an incongruity, a stain of weakness on the landscape of warriors. He felt a surge of righteous indignation. It was his duty, as an officer of Marines, to maintain the standards, to protect the sanctity of this place. Elias Thorne did not look up. He had heard the voice, of course. He had heard every kind of voice a man could produce. The pleading whispers of the dying, the bellowing commands of sergeants, the terrified screams of boys who thought they were men. This voice was just noise, insignificant static in the profound silence he carried within him. He placed another handful of snow onto the growing sphere, pressing it into place with the palm of his gloved hand. The texture of the snow was familiar. Cold, gritty, honest. McCarthy's ego bristled at being ignored. It was like throwing a rock at a battleship. The lack of a response was more infuriating than any retort. He strode forward, his boots crunching loudly, deliberately. He stopped a few feet from the old man, casting a long shadow over his work. "Hey, I'm talking to you, Pop." Still, no response. Elias continued his task, his focus absolute. He was listening to the snow. He was listening to the ghosts who whispered in the wind. One of the lance corporals, a kid named Henderson, shifted his weight, a flicker of unease in his eyes. There was something about the old man's silence that felt heavier than defiance. But McCarthy saw only disrespect. "Are you deaf, old man?" he snapped, his voice rising in pitch. "This is a United States Marine Corps installation, not a retirement home playground." Behind them, watching from the covered entrance to the mess hall, was Corporal Evans. Evans was different. He was on his second enlistment, and the shine of boot camp had long worn off, replaced by a quieter, more observant professionalism. He saw the scene unfolding and felt a familiar knot tighten in his gut. It was the same feeling he got when he saw a boot lace a new recruit, the ugly spectacle of power being abused for sport. He watched the lieutenant, a man he already privately distrusted for his bluster and lack of genuine field sense. And he watched the old man, whose calm was so profound it was almost unnerving. It wasn't the vacant calm of senility. It was the centered calm of a predator at rest. Finally, Elias paused. He did not turn or look up. He simply stopped moving. The air grew heavy with anticipation. Slowly, as if lifting a great weight, he straightened his back. The movement was stiff but not weak. He turned his head, and for the first time, Lieutenant McCarthy found himself being looked at. The old man's eyes were the color of a winter sky just before dusk. Deep, cold, and vast. They held no fear, no anger, no emotion at all that McCarthy could recognize. It was like looking into a deep, cold well. "The snow is good today," Elias said. His voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together at the bottom of a river. It was gravelly, quiet, yet it carried over the wind with perfect clarity. The simple, unexpected statement threw McCarthy off balance. He had been prepared for a fight, for a plea, for a fumbling apology, not a weather report. He recovered quickly, his arrogance rushing back in to fill the void of his confusion. "The snow is good?" he mocked, forcing a laugh. "What the hell does that mean? Are you simple? I'm asking what you're doing here. This is a restricted area for active duty personnel." Elias looked from the lieutenant to the half-finished snowman. "I'm remembering," he said, the words simple and unadorned. This was too much for McCarthy. The old man was not just ignoring his authority. He was speaking in riddles, treating him like an irrelevance. The perceived disrespect was a physical thing, a hot coal in his chest. His own insecurities, the deep-seated fear that he wasn't the warrior he pretended to be, flared into rage. Remembering, McCarthy spat the word. "You can remember somewhere else. I want to see your identification. Now, and your base pass. You have no business being out here." Elias reached slowly into his coat pocket. He withdrew a worn leather wallet. He fumbled for a moment, his fingers seeming clumsy in the cold, a stark contrast to their earlier steadiness. McCarthy smirked, his confidence restored by this display of apparent frailty. Elias produced a visitor's pass, properly stamped, and a driver's license. McCarthy snatched them from his hand. "Elias Thorne," he read aloud, his tone dripping with condescension. He glanced at the date of birth. 86 years old. Jesus, you should be in a damn museum, not getting in the way of real Marines. Corporal Evans, still watching from afar, felt his hand twitch. This was wrong. Deeply wrong. The base sergeant major had put out a memo that morning. A very specific guest was to be on base. A guest to be afforded every courtesy. The name had been Thorne. Evans's mind raced. It couldn't be. Not this quiet old man building a snowman. The memo had spoken of a legend. McCarthy handed the IDs back dismissively. "Your pass says you're a guest to the commanding general. That's a good one. I'm sure General Miller has nothing better to do than entertain relics like you." He took a step closer, his face inches from Elias's. "You think because you knew some general 50 years ago, you can just wander wherever you want? This is my parade deck, my Marines, and you are a distraction." Elias met his gaze. The well of his eyes seemed to deepen. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of something ancient and dangerous moved in their depths. It was a memory. The snow isn't white. It's gray, stained with cordite and the frozen blood of children who were told they were men. The wind isn't just cold. It's a physical entity, a predator that gnaws at exposed flesh and steals the breath from your lungs. It carries the screams of the wounded and the Mandarin curses of the enemy, who swarm the ridgeline like ghosts in white quilts. He is 20 years old. He is alone. His M1 is empty. His fingers are numb stumps, but they find the handle of the trenching tool. The shadows move. He rises to meet them. The flashback was gone as quickly as it came. A ghost of a sensation, the phantom weight of the steel entrenching tool in his hand. His expression did not change. "This is a place for warriors," McCarthy continued, his voice now a low, menacing growl. He was drunk on his own minor power, performing for his subordinates. Not for geriatrics playing with snowballs. "You want to be here? You want to stand on the ground where Marines train to fight and die? Then show me something. Show me one thing a warrior does." He punctuated the demand with a shove. Not to the old man. To the Snowman. His boot connected with the carefully packed base. The bottom sphere cracked and crumbled, sending the torso tumbling to the ground where it shattered into 1,000 pieces of sparkling dust. It was the ultimate act of contempt. A line had been crossed. The air crackled. The world seemed to hold its breath. Corporal Evans saw it happen, and his decision was made. His training, his instincts, the stories his own grandfather, a Vietnam vet, had told him about quiet, dangerous old men, it all coalesced into a single, urgent imperative. He slipped back into the mess hall, his heart pounding. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the number for the base command post. He had to make the call. But back on the parade ground, something had changed. The moment McCarthy's boot destroyed the Snowman, the placid, weary mask on Elias Thorne's face vanished. It was not a conscious decision. It was a switch being flipped in the deepest, most primal part of his brain. The part that had been forged in the frozen hell of the chosen reservoir. The part that had never truly left. His body, which had seemed so stiff and frail, moved with a terrifying, liquid grace. It wasn't fast. It was efficient. In a single, fluid motion, he dropped. One knee hit the ground, then the other. He didn't fall. He flowed downward, using gravity as a tool. His left foot kicked out, not in aggression, but with purpose, sculpting a small berm from the loose snow. His right foot did the same on the other side. He used the ruined base of the Snowman as frontal cover, its broken mass a perfect, natural shield. He settled onto his stomach, his body low, his profile almost non-existent against the white landscape. His elbows dug into the snow, creating stable firing points. His hands clasped together in front of him, forming a cradle for a rifle that was not there. His head was canted just so, his breathing slowing to a shallow, almost imperceptible rhythm. He had become part of the earth. From a standing, unassuming old man to a perfectly concealed, textbook sniper in a hasty hide. The entire transformation took less than 30 seconds. Lieutenant McCarthy stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. The sheer, violent economy of the movement was something he had only ever seen in training films featuring elite scout snipers. It was an act of pure, distilled muscle memory, performed by a body that should not have been capable of it. The three lance corporals stared, their bravado evaporating like mist. They were looking at something ancient and profound. They had demanded the old man show them what a warrior does. And he had. He had shown them the art of becoming invisible, the art of preparing to kill, the art of survival. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the wind, which now seemed to whisper a name. Evans, on the phone, was stammering to the duty officer. "Corporal Evans, sir, on the main parade ground. Lieutenant McCarthy is confronting a civilian guest. Sir, you need to see this. The guest, I think you need to get the general." He didn't know how to describe what he had just witnessed. How could he explain that an old man had just turned himself into a weapon system using nothing but snow and gravity? The response on the other end was clipped and urgent. The duty officer must have known about the special guest. The name Thorne must have been a tripwire. Before Evans could say another word, the sharp, distinct sound of vehicle engines cut through the air, not the rumble of a supply truck. This was the aggressive, throaty growl of military Humvees moving at speed. A convoy of 3 black vehicles, their tires churning plumes of snow, sliced across the parade ground. Red flag plates bearing 3 silver stars were mounted on the fenders of the lead vehicle. The commanding general. The convoy screeched to a halt, forming a protective semicircle around the scene. Doors flew open. Marines from the security detail, clad in full battle rattle, poured out, their M4 rifles held at a low ready. They did not aim at the old man. They created a perimeter, their eyes scanning outward, securing the area. The rear door of the lead Humvee opened. Out stepped General Marcus Miller. He was a tall, imposing man whose face looked like it had been carved from granite. His uniform was immaculate, his 3 stars glittering against the gray sky. He moved with a coiled energy, his fury a palpable force that seemed to warp the air around him. The entire world fell silent. The wind died down. The snowflakes seemed to hang suspended in the air. Lieutenant McCarthy felt a cold dread wash over him, a cold far deeper than the winter air. He snapped to what he hoped was a rigid position of attention, his mind a frantic, screaming void. General Miller's eyes, chips of blue ice, swept the scene. He saw the disgraced lieutenant. He saw the stunned lance corporals. He saw the shattered Snowman. And he saw the old man, still perfectly settled in the sniper's hide he had carved from the snow. The general's face, already hard, seemed to harden further into something primordial and dangerous. He completely ignored Lieutenant McCarthy. He walked past him as if he were a piece of furniture. He strode directly to the snow hide where Elias Thorne lay. His polished boots stopped inches from the old man's head. For a long moment, the 3-star general simply stood there, looking down at the figure in the snow. A complex storm of emotions played across his face. Awe, sorrow, rage, and a profound, bottomless reverence. Gunner Thorne. General Miller's voice was a low rumble, but it carried the absolute weight of command. It was also thick with an emotion McCarthy could not comprehend. It sounded like love. "You can stand easy now," the general said softly. "The hill is secure." Slowly, the old man moved. The predatory stillness receded, replaced once more by the careful, deliberate motions of age. He pushed himself up, first to his knees, then, with a hand from the general, to his feet. He brushed the snow from his worn wool coat. His face was once again a placid mask of weary calm. He looked at the general and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. General Miller released the old man's arm. He took one step back, and then, in the swirling snow, in front of his security detail and the stunned young Marines, the 3-star commanding general of Marine Corps Base Quantico snapped to the most rigid, perfect salute of his life. It was a salute of such precision and heartfelt respect that it was a physical blow. "Sir," General Miller said, his voice ringing with conviction, "it is an honor to have you on my base." Lieutenant McCarthy felt the ground drop out from under him. "Sir," a general was calling this decrepit old man sir. A gunnery sergeant, even a retired one, was never addressed as sir. It was a violation of every protocol he had ever learned. It was an impossibility, unless the man was not just a man. Elias Thorne returned the salute with a tired, weary gesture, more a brief touch of his fingers to his brow than a formal military courtesy. General Miller held his own salute for a full 3 seconds before crisply dropping his hand. He then turned, and the full, unadulterated fury of his command presence fell upon Lieutenant Chad McCarthy. "Lieutenant," Miller's voice was no longer emotional. It was a weapon. Cold, sharp, and lethal. "What is your name?" "McCarthy, sir," the lieutenant stammered, his body rigid with terror. "McCarthy." The general repeated the name as if it were a foul taste in his mouth. He gestured with a leather-gloved hand toward Elias Thorne. "Do you have any idea who this is?" "No, sir," McCarthy whispered. "Of course you don't," Miller snarled. "You saw a frail old man. You saw a target for your pathetic, insecure bullying. You saw a civilian you could belittle to make yourself feel powerful in front of your men." He took a step toward McCarthy, who flinched involuntarily. You demanded this man show you what a warrior does. He did. He showed you a skill that has been forgotten by most of this corps. He showed you how to become the angel of death with nothing but a handful of snow and the will to survive. The general's voice rose, echoing across the now silent parade ground. Onlookers had gathered at the edges, drawn by the commotion. They were about to receive a history lesson. "Marines!" Miller bellowed, his voice the clap of doom. "You see this man? You see this quiet, humble man you thought was just some grandfather playing in the snow?" He turned back to Elias, his expression softening for a moment. "This is Gunnery Sergeant Elias Thorne, retired. And the only reason he isn't Sergeant Major of the entire Marine Corps is because he turned it down 3 times. A murmur went through the assembled crowd. "This man enlisted in 1948, the general continued, his voice a history lecture delivered with the force of a battering ram. "He fought at Incheon. He fought at the Pusan perimeter. And then he went to a place called Chosin, a frozen piece of hell where God himself forgot about the United States Marine Corps." He pointed a finger at McCarthy, but his eyes were on the crowd, on every young Marine within earshot. At the battle for Fox Hill, his entire platoon was wiped out. He was wounded. His rifle was destroyed. For 6 hours, in 30 below zero weather, he held off an entire company of Chinese soldiers. Alone, with a captured Dekyryov machine gun he didn't know how to operate and a field-scoped M1 Garand, he took off his dead platoon leader. The story hung in the frozen air, unbelievable and yet utterly true. He held that hill. He saved the flank of the 7th Marine Regiment. He allowed the rest of the 1st Marine Division to fight their way out. For that action, President Truman personally placed the Medal of Honor around his neck. A collective gasp rippled through the Marines. They were standing in the presence of a living God from the pages of their history books. But that's not what they called him. Miller's voice dropped to a conspiratorial, reverent whisper. The Chinese he fought, the few who survived, that didn't know his name. They only knew that anyone who tried to climb that hill was met by a single, silent shot from the swirling snow. They said the mountain itself was killing them. They called him a ghost, a phantom. They called him Dongji Dagimo. He paused, letting the weight of the words sink in. The Winter Ghost. The call sign settled over the parade ground like a shroud. The Winter Ghost. Elias Thorne stared at the broken snowman, his expression unreadable. He was not remembering the medal. He was remembering the faces of the boys who had died at his side. The snowman hadn't been a toy. It was a memorial. Every year, on the anniversary of the battle, on the first heavy snow, he built one for them. For Billy, the radio man from Ohio. For Corporal Sanchez, who had given him his last canteen of water before bleeding out in his arms. For all of them. General Miller turned his full, terrifying attention back to the trembling lieutenant. "You, McCarthy, you, with your polished boots and your arrogant sneer. You stand on ground that was purchased by the blood of men like him. You wear a uniform that he sanctified with his courage, and you used your rank, your unearned authority, to humiliate him." The general's voice dropped to a deadly calm. "You are a disgrace. You are a stain on the legacy of this corps. You are not fit to lead Marines. You are not fit to wear this cloth." He looked at the base sergeant major, who had arrived with the convoy and was standing nearby, his face a mask of cold fury. "Sergeant Major, relieve this officer. Take a sidearm. Escort him to the provost marshal's office. He is confined to quarters pending a full investigation and court-martial proceedings. His career in my Marine Corps is over. Effective immediately." Aye, sir," the sergeant major boomed, his voice filled with grim satisfaction. He and 2 MPs descended on McCarthy. The lieutenant stood there, his face ashen, his world completely and utterly shattered. He was no longer a leader of men. He was a pariah. A cautionary tale that would be told in every squad bay in the Corps for the next 50 years. His cronies, the 3 lance corporals, were backing away, their faces pale with horror, trying to disassociate themselves from the career suicide they had just witnessed. As the sergeant major began to lead the disgraced McCarthy away, Elias Thorne spoke. "General," his voice was quiet, but it stopped everyone in their tracks. Miller turned to him, his expression immediately softening. "Gunner," Elias looked at the back of the young lieutenant's head. He saw not the arrogant officer, but the scared, foolish boy beneath. A boy just like the ones he had led into the frozen mountains of Korea so long ago. "The boy is young," Elias said, his voice raspy. "The snow is cold, but it teaches." It was not a plea for mercy. It was a statement of fact, a piece of wisdom offered from a great and terrible height. He was showing grace to a man who had shown him none. It was, perhaps, the most profound demonstration of his superiority that day. General Miller looked at Elias, then at McCarthy. He nodded slowly. "He will have a lot of time to learn its lessons, Gunner. I promise you that." The sergeant major led McCarthy away, his future a bleak, empty expanse. The crowd of Marines began to part, creating a silent, respectful path for Elias Thorne. He wanted no more fanfare. He had done what he came to do. He gave a final, slow nod to the general. Then he turned and began to walk away, his steps slow and steady in the falling snow. He did not look back. The silence he left behind was the loudest sound the world had ever heard on that parade ground. The epilogue was written not in reports, but in actions. Chad McCarthy was not court-martialed. General Miller, honoring the spirit of Gunner Thorne's words, had him administratively separated from Marine Corps with a general discharge under honorable conditions. His career was over, but his life was not ruined. He was last seen working as a shift manager at a logistics warehouse in Ohio, a quiet, humble man who flinched every time it started to snow. The 3 lance corporals with him were formally counseled and spent the next 6 months on every miserable working party the base had to offer, a penance that taught them more about humility than 1,000 lectures. Corporal Evans was personally commended by General Miller and received a meritorious promotion to sergeant. His actions became a case study at officer candidate school on the importance of moral courage and trusting one's instincts. And on the base, a new tradition was born. The Gunner Thorne Lecture Series on Marine Corps heritage was established, a mandatory annual brief for all personnel. And every year, on the day of the first heavy snow, the main parade ground was cordoned off. No training was allowed. No vehicles were permitted to cross. It was a day of quiet reflection. In the center of the pristine white field, a single, perfectly built snowman would appear before dawn, erected by the base commander and the sergeant major themselves. A memorial to the ghosts of Chosen and to the quiet legend who walked among them. Far from the noise and discipline of Quantico, in a small, warm house filled with the smell of old books and wood smoke, Elias Thorne sat in his favorite chair. He was looking at a faded, black-and-white photograph on his mantelpiece. It showed a group of exhausted, frost-rimed young Marines in Korea. They were huddled together for warmth, their faces impossibly young. In the background, almost lost in the snowy landscape, stood a small, lopsided snowman. He closed his eyes, the steady silence of his home a comfort. The greatest warriors are not the ones who seek the loudest acclaim, but the ones who carry the heaviest silence.